the cloud. Okay, and hopefully, Leslie, at some point you can hear me, and I'm going to share the screen now, just so you can see it as well. And then I'm gonna put it into the slideshow mode. And so the topic I'm going to go into tonight is progress monitoring. And the two of you probably hear that a bit, P meetings, etc. And Leslie, I would assume the same thing. Oh, there's, okay. Oh, okay. I got you, Leslie. I see you there. But I'm going to go into a little bit of more detail concerning what it is and kind of the best practices with progress monitoring. If I can see here. So I'm going to go this route for right now. Let me. Okay, so I'll go through this quickly because you guys know kind of the overview, introductions. I'll just kind of go through introductions really quick. Leslie Jacoby is on Zoom. Thanks for joining us, Leslie, and thanks for being such a, faithful participant. We have Stevie and then Terry. So it's just the four of us. And so the overview of the topic tonight is what is progress monitoring? I'm going to talk about some key elements for progress monitoring. Progress monitoring across various contexts, meaning everything from reading to math to behavior, whatever it might be. And then some guidance documents and resources, and then any questions you have. The mission, you guys have seen this many times before, actively represent children with disabilities and impacting decisions made on their behalf. Our vision is that all learners are respected and challenged with high expectations, needs are met, and student aspirations for success are fulfilled. And really, just to paraphrase this, the overview, SEAC stands for Special Education Advisory Committee, and the A for advisory means just to it high. Hey, Liz, I didn't recognize you with my glasses off. Is to advise and not specifically advocate for your needs. However, with that being said, we have a pretty small group. So if at any point you want to advocate, and you guys know that you can, real quickly, I'll introduce Liz. This is Liz Morna. She's the executive director at the ARC of Southwest Colorado. And thanks for joining us. And then I also have Leslie Jacoby is on Zoom. Yep. And then the norms, really just sharing ideas that would impact the greater good, honor everyone's time, and honor all perspectives. And then, Stevie, have I shared the parent handbook with you? Do you have access to that? Okay. Do you want me to email you a copy? Okay. Right. And Terry, you okay. And Liz, this is Terry and Stevie.
Hi,
yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. And Liz, you're familiar with that handbook, correct? The parent handbook, yeah. Now, and Liz, I think you may have missed it, but I'm going to talk a bit about progress monitoring tonight. Oh, good, good. Just a riveting topic.
It is, well,
Yeah,
and it's always good to know it kind of like just
Yeah.
to remind myself how it's supposed to be done.
Right, right. Yeah, that's it. How it's supposed to be done. Well, and so this is a piece that this is kind of for teachers, paraprofessionals, as well as parents, but who we consider are within district experts who really know best practice concerning progress monitoring and what to do with that information are these individuals here. So our school psychologists, our behavior analysts, also known as BCBAs, our social emotional specialists and interventionists, academic interventionists, our special service providers, OTs, PTs, speech language pathologists, of course, our school psychologists, the student support services department administrators, that would be myself, Vanessa Giddings, and Mari Stevenson. And then our CIA stands for Curriculum Instruction and Assessment department administrators, and that would be Lori Rosbach and Dylan Cannell. And so what we do is, we have teachers, whether they're general education teachers, special education teachers, but they can come to these individuals and find out everything from tools to frequency of progress monitoring and really what to do with that information once you have it. And utilizing, the one area where people really struggle with is progress monitoring social emotional pieces as well as behavior pieces. So really having these individuals, and particularly our behavior analysts, come up with some workable tools for teachers and paraprofessionals to implement. And so these are the experts. And then, back to the basics. What is progress monitoring? It's really the frequent ongoing assessment of a student's progress towards their goals and implemented intervention. Now, one of the things we say frequent ongoing assessment. So the big question we run into is, what does that mean? And so it's really dependent upon the age of the student as well as the frequency of that intervention. So progress monitoring could happen as frequently as some of our students who have really intensive interventions will be progress monitoring them on an hourly basis. But then when we think about tier 1 progress monitoring, or for a general education student, we talk about benchmarking. And so we administer district-wide assessments, and we do those at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year, so we can track progress of our students across the continuum of a year. But it's only 3 times a year, and that might be an iReady assessment at the elementary and the middle school levels, or a STAR assessment more at that high school and also the middle school level. But the big purpose of progress monitoring for students who are either potentially moving towards special education in a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention, or in special education, is really determining the response to an intervention or the lack thereof. And in order to do that with fidelity, we typically recommend progress monitoring a student at least every 2 weeks. And that's particularly applies to both reading and math. And in many instances, our schools look at, in many schools throughout the country, look at one particular tool that pertains to reading, and that would be reading fluency. In reading fluency, it's a great kind of universal tool to use. But when we have these students who are more impacted with reading, we have to expand those tools. And I'm not going to get into that right now. But anyways, looking at that first bullet here, determining a student response to an intervention and seeing how they respond. And then if the team is determining, hey, not really responding to this, they need to say, okay, what changes are we going to make to the intervention? Are we going to increase the intensity of the intervention, make it more targeted by having fewer students? Or are we going to completely start over and choose a whole new intervention? And then the other piece is looking at reasons why the team feels that a student is not demonstrating that expected growth. So one of the keys to this is when you put this intervention into place, you ensure that you're progress monitoring frequently, then the IEP team, or what we term the child study team, needs to convene frequently in order to see how they're responding within the collaborative team, make determinations about next steps. Do you guys have any questions about that? Sorry, I'm talking a ton.
Being like that first slide of all the different.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So the team, so when I say child study, I'm referring to those students who might be struggling in an area. So for example, they might be having difficulty with reading. And so the general education teacher will typically bring that to the child study team. Now, each school has a different name for the child study team, but they'll say, you know, I've been doing this, this, and this, and he's still not really accessing that content. So I need the team to help me on next steps. And then that team, and it'll be the general education teacher, in many instances, the school psychologist, a building administrator, might be a school social worker, school counselor, academic interventionist. They'll kind of determine next steps. And in some instances, they'll say, okay, let's implement general education accommodations and see how the student's responding to that. Or they'll say, you know what, he would be more appropriate for a tier 2 reading intervention comprised of a class of 8 students and 1 teacher using an evidence-based curriculum and really targeting those skills. And I typically, when I talk about this stuff, I'll often say reading because it's easier to think about in that capacity, but it can really run the gamut from behavior to, in behavior, a lot of times we think of that explosive behavior, but really cognizant as well of those internalizing kids, which those are so much more difficult to see because you're, you know, like anyone's more susceptible to a kid who's really, you know, displaying behaviors in the classroom as opposed to a kid who might put their head on the table. But really it runs the gamut. And so in each area of impact, you have to respond to differently.
So when we, when you're talking about this, when things are
On each goal, right?
Well, you wanna, yes, you want to progress monitor on each goal, but I'm looking at it more broadly because this could be kids in the MTSS process as well, who don't have an identified disability at this point. Before
this is progress monitored.
Just in their response to intervention is what.
Not necessarily, but when we're talking about special education specifically, it'd be in their specific goal.
Okay.
Yeah, yep. And so going back, the key elements is the team needs to identify and define the area of concern. So that's one of the pieces, is whether they're in special education or the MTSS process, is really targeting that area, because it's going to change throughout the years. So for example, a student might really be having, for example, more explosive behaviors, but then as they grow and mature, those behaviors might change where they're not necessarily being explosive, but they become more internalizers, and they don't engage with their peers potentially, or they won't engage in a non-preferred task. So the team really needs to identify that area of concern and then selecting a progress monitoring tool. And as I was saying earlier, like having a reading deficit, it's much easier to identify a tool than it is to find a kid who might not engage in a non-preferred task. So for example, you would say, okay, Scotty, it's time to get out your math work and we need to do it. And then you run into this refusal, or you might run into real behavior, but choosing a tool to monitoring how he's responding to that. And then another key is determining their baseline skill level. So for example, you're in an IEP meeting and the student is really struggling with reading fluency. And you would say, okay, they're a 6th grade student, they're reading on a 3rd grade level. The team's going to use a 3rd grade reading passage. And you'd say on this particular date, they're reading 47 words per minute. So that would be your baseline. Or with behavior, it would look a lot different than that. And then the team sets a goal. And one of the pieces with that is that's where it can be a little gray. And what I hear from parents, and I was guilty of this when I was a special education teacher, is we tend to set goals too ambitious. And I get that feedback from parents, like, these goals are way too ambitious. And with reading in particular, you can typically look at, there's tables designed to show rates of increase. So with reading, you can really look at what's deemed an appropriate rate of increase with reading fluency, for example. With behavior, that might be much more difficult to discern, but it's really dependent upon the intervention that you put into place. So, but the key elements of those are identifying and defining the area of concern, choosing a tool that's appropriate and that the team can ensure will be used, really looking at where they are at that baseline, and then kind of setting a goal for where you want them to end up. And with an IEP, it would be obviously within a year. However, if you're in an intervention and you're not in special education yet, you might be looking at 8 weeks. And a lot of times we'll set 8-week cycles for interventions, and then the team reconvenes and looks at how the students are responding to them. But one of the key pieces is collecting that progress monitoring data regularly. And, our elementary teachers are really good about collecting this data very frequently. When we get more to those secondary levels, that regularly that timeline increases a bit, but we just need to ensure we're continuing to collect that data and have enough data points. Any questions about that? And then, the key element, the first element that I just went through is identify and determine the areas of concern. So, really determining what specific issue is arising. And here I am again, back to my reading fluency. So the team might say, okay, he's having difficulty reading. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to look at the number of words read per minute on a grade level text. And then we're also going to monitor the accuracy of the words a student reads per minute. And then the area of concern might also be behavior during transitions. And that could be everything from transitioning from one activity in the classroom to another, or say at that middle school level where they're transitioning from one class to the next, and they're going to be in more of a unstructured environment outside of the classroom. And that's where students, they really run into issues. And has your son ever expressed anything about those transitions? Yeah.
I think when he was in 6th grade, it was a little scary.
Yeah, I mean, one of the pieces to me that is really hard for kids is all the way through elementary school, they're in lines. They have to line up, they're extremely structured, and then they get to 6th grade and they get to do whatever they want. And that's, some kids thrive off that, but I would say most don't.
Well, and at lunchtime, that seems to be like when he seems to get into trouble is at lunchtime because it's a longer period of structuredness.
Right. Yeah, they can sit wherever they want. There's more kids, it's loud, and then they go outside. Yeah. So this behavior during transition, so the team might say, okay, the student really has a difficult time having a safe body during transitions, following directions with no more than one reminder during transition. So the team really getting specific as to what they're going to be progress monitoring. So that's the first key step that teams need to do. And this applies to both special education and MTSS. And then determining how their improvement or their lack thereof will be documented. So the first thing the team needs to look at is how frequently they're going to assess or progress monitor the student. If that tool they're going to use to monitor aligns to the area of concern, that's a key component. And a lot of times we'll get lazy and say, okay, we'll use this progress monitoring tool, but is it really the tool we should be using to see if they're being more successful? And then alignment to their skill level. So really saying, does this align with where they are? So for example, maybe we'd give them a progress monitoring passage. They're a 6th grade student, and you give them a 6th grade passage, but they're reading at a 2nd grade level. They're probably not going to make a lot of progress. And then whatever resources needed. And so with the resources needed, that's where teams need to come back to those individuals, whether those are the special service providers who are more familiar with these tools, interventionists, behavior analysts, whatever it might be. And so on the right side, here's an example of that. A 5th grader is struggling with decoding. So the tool would be the Acadians, or as you guys might know, DIBELS, it's word fluency probes at a 3rd grade level. So what those nonsense word fluency probes are, nonsense words are just not actual words. It's the ability of the student to see like DEB, for instance, and they would be able to sound that out with the short vowel in the middle and be able to accurately decode each one of those particular sounds. And then frequency of that happening would be every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks after they've had, a decent amount of intervention. For example, we'd say, okay, they're going to get a reading intervention, 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and we're going to see how he responds, and we'll give them a 1-minute timed assessment on the Friday in 2 weeks. And the resources, you need 1 person and 3 minutes per assessment. And so that's the key component, really, defining the area, the frequency of the assessment, how frequent, when they're going to do it, and how and who is going to be doing that progress monitoring. And then the other element is selecting that tool that you're going to use. So grade age level tools. And this is a big debate. A question that's often posed to me is, should IEP goals be written at the student's grade level? Because by federal law, we have to write IEP goals and have them align with standards at the student's grade level. But the question that comes to me is, in many instances, reading, should they be given a reading passage at their current grade level or their current instructional level? And what best practice, in my opinion, is to use their instructional level. Because what I was explaining previously, you're going to give a kiddo who can't access 6th grade content, despite they're in the 6th grade, but they read at a 2nd grade level. If you give them 6th grade, you're not going to find any progress. So the grade level tools are, it's a meaningful comparison between, their same grade peers, if they're a standardized assessment. And it's a comparison between student skills and their grade level expectations. But really, the pros of an instructional level is they're more sensitive to capturing growth on below grade level skills. And it really looks more at that mastery piece. So if you set a goal for a student at a 2nd grade level, they're more likely to get that. And also, the other piece is you're more likely to get that kid to engage if they can access it. If they can't access that content, if it's not within their zone of proximal development, it's going to be really challenging for the kid, and it'll just make them frustrated. So I always recommend doing instructional level. And ironically, I have it right here. I'm not going to bring it up, but I had this question come up to me last week, and I referenced and provided the team the Office of Special Education Programming at the federal level, and they wrote a document surrounding this from 2015. And, it's a 7-page document about, standards-based grades and ensuring students are given standards at their instructional level. But to make meaning of that document, it's really tricky. But my recommendation is giving them at their instructional level.
Well, and I was just thinking about, when Will was learning to read, he's a reader. Still, when he's learning to read, it depended on what book you gave him, what the topic was, whether he was interested in, and there's always some, catering for their interests in that whole piece too, because you gave him a book on sharks, he was going to eat it up, but you gave him a book on dolls and he didn't care.
Yeah.
Whatever, whatever the topic was.
And that's a good point, because, you know, you'll see students, they might start reading a story and it's a progress monitoring tool. And then all of a sudden you'll see their frequency increase. Yeah, it's either decrease or increase depending upon the story. So one of the pieces with that too, what I would do when I was doing progress monitoring is I would give a kid 3 passages. And then you give the kid 3 1-minute passages, and then you would determine the scores out of those 3. And that plays into interest as well.
Sure about.
Yeah. And it's really telling too, when the kid, you finish the passage and they say, oh, can I just keep reading this?
Mhm.
And right there, you're kind of thinking, well, is this really a skill I should be monitoring if they can access this? So, so anyways, that's where that is. But that question of grade level or instructional level always comes up to me. And it truly, to me, it makes most sense to do the instructional level. Oh, okay, now how did I get to this? Okay, there we go. Okay, the second key element is selecting that tool. You know, and okay, okay. The specific tool, you know, used will depend on the purpose of the assessment and the skill level of the student. So, and that's one of the pieces. It's okay to use both. You can use grade level and instructional level tools, but typically where that student's going to show that progress is at that grade level tool. And you want to absolutely, or excuse me, instructional level tool, but you want to provide that intervention where they're moving to that grade level tool. And you want to obviously close that achievement gap. So it is important to look at that, and there may be instances where you're going to use both. And your IEP goal might not reflect both. It might be instructional level or it might be grade level, but having both pieces of that information is going to inform the intervention as well as the teams on how they're doing. And then, you know, as I mentioned before, determining the baseline skill level. Using that tool, you know, you want to find out where they're currently functioning. So one of the pieces you have to do is considering the accuracy of that baseline data. So going back to that, reading it, you know, the fluency intervention, it's really important for teams to, one, follow the guidelines outlined in that particular tool that they're using. And in many instances, those tools are going to be norm referenced across a huge sample size. So for example, if you're using a reading fluency tool, you might have an N size, or the number of people who've taken it could be 30,000 people. So, or students, I should say. So you're going to get accurate data, but that's really important, particularly when you're finding that baseline, to use 3 probes, as we call them. So doing 3 1-minute timed assessments. And then the number of baseline data points that references back to those 3 probes you're giving the student, and then revisiting that defined area of concern. You know, and the example here, you know, observing this student with non-preferred tasks, and you're going to see that student in a small group instruction with 2 other students and seeing how they respond. How whole group instruction with a substitute teacher, how are they going to do in that environment? Not great, but just saying that. And then the third observation would be whole group instruction with the typical teacher and the paraprofessional support. And they're probably going to do much better. So really seeing how the kid responds across various contexts And that's going to be important as well. And that's obviously for their behavior and their ability to use their executive functioning skills. Okay. And then key element 4 is really setting that goal. And this is where the nuance comes in. So you're going to determine that adequate growth during the progress monitoring based on the baseline data and the student's context. So let's say, for instance, we're looking at an 8-week cycle, because when we're in that MTSS process, you're going to be in that. And so during that intervention, you might do a 2-week cycle or even a 1-week cycle of that progress monitoring. So, you know, when the student was in general ed alone, looking at their rate of progress during that time. And you could use, for example, I was mentioning those benchmarking assessments. So those 3 assessments they get throughout the year, looking at their progress with that, and then saying, okay, they didn't really show a lot of progress. So therefore, we're putting them in intervention, and we're gonna look at adequate growth. And then looking at that normative data, that's what I was referring to again. And that's where it gets easy. So if you have a group of students, 30,000 students who took an assessment, you're going to have a rate of increase really well defined. So typically on those progress monitoring reading tools, they'll say you're going to see the increase of 1 word per minute per week. It's never that cleanly defined, but you would be able to say, okay, within 52 weeks of an IEP, they're going to grow by 52 words per minute. That's what that data is stating, and that progress monitoring tool is at their instructional level. And that makes it really clear for teams. But in many instances, special education teachers could say, okay, that's the typical rate of increase that they're going to increase by 1 word per minute per week. So we'd look at 52 words per minute per year. But this is where the subjectivity comes in the sense that the teacher might say, well, they're going to be in a 45 minute a day intervention with me. And it's really going to be targeted and focused. So I think I can increase that up to 90 words within 1 year. That's way too ambitious in my opinion, but that's where sometimes teachers can say, I'm really experienced at providing this intervention. I know where the kid is, and I'm going to have the ability to move them. So, I mean, that's not such a bad thing, but it's also, we have to make it realistic. And, you know, coming back to that focus and intensity of that intervention, and lastly, the student contextual information. So, for example, in the previous slide, how are they going to respond when they're in that classroom? Like you were sharing, Stevie, when there's so much disruption in the paraprofessionals, how is that going to affect the student's progress? So there's the example, the 3rd grade student is really struggling with addition and subtraction. And then the team determines 2 correct problems per minute over the past month. So really, you know, coming up with a adequate growth on that particular tool. Okay, and then key element 5, just that piece is collecting that progress monitoring data regularly. You know, and so one of the big pieces is who's going to do that, when are they going to do that, and where are they going to do that? And I think the in the IEP meeting, that should be determined. In the MTSS meeting, that should also be determined. And that could look a bunch of different ways. So that could be a paraprofessional. They might be collecting it when they're in the general education classroom. The teams really need to define that. Otherwise, doing all these other steps aren't gonna lead to good outcomes. And then ensuring that the person who's administering the assessment is trained on how to administer that properly. And so that's where it comes back to the experts and ensuring that those individuals train the paraprofessional or the teacher to administer that, so they're making sure it's standardized. And then the last piece that is super important as well is the frequency of reviewing that data. So ensuring that teams are looking at the information they've collected, determining how the student is responding, and then coming up with next steps. And that's actually a really tricky piece. And all those are in there. And so I put this on here because I was talking about MTSS and this pyramid that nobody can read from where you guys are. This is the MTSS pyramid, and it's really changed over the years. It used to be just a very clean pyramid, but now what we're saying is that tier 3, where it's more the intensive level of supports, really needs to be targeted that much more. And then we also, one of the things, ironically, Dr. Chesser, our superintendent, she added tier 0. We don't have it on here, but that's that universal instruction. And when we consider tier 1, that's a universal instruction as well, but we also put in supports that students need. And then tier 2, we get into more intensive. Tier 3 is the last tier prior to moving to special education. And then, you know, this last piece, these are progress monitoring and MTSS in the school district. So, and just so you're aware, MTSS stands for multi-tiered systems of support. And so for reading, for the MTSS is the K5. Here's the graphic. I don't know if you'll be able to read it, but these are the various curriculums that we use. So what we recommend for the core instruction is Hagerty Phonemic Awareness K through 2. We also use Orton Gillingham K through 2. We use a high frequency word list. We have EL language arts and level classroom libraries. And then at that tier 1, we have iReady, small group instruction, 6-minute solutions. But I'll get to the tier 3 piece. And this is kind of special education, and just prior to that, for the curriculum at the reading, we have Wilson Reading Systems, Benchmark Intervention Systems, Spire 4th edition, Seeing Stars, and SIPs. And then for progress monitoring tools for reading, we have Acadience, which is also known as DIBBLS, Program Specific Assessments, WRS assessments, and all these different tools. So there's a lot of stuff with that. And then math. Well, and then here's one, the 6 through 12. I'll go into that a little bit for reading and just look at the tier 3. We have Wilson Reading Systems, Read 180. And then one that's not in there for reading is what's called Sunday Reading Curriculum, which both our elementary and secondary special education teachers are using. Let me go back to this. And then K5 for math. The tier 3, we have Bridges and Into Math are tier 3 tools. And then 6 through 12, we have Delta Math and Alex RTI. Alex Math is what we call it. So if you guys want to look at all the various tools, I'm happy to send you these. I believe they're also on our district website, but it goes through all these various curriculums that we're using now. And probably won't get into this, there's criteria around, so going back to that MTSS process, there's only 2 disabilities where you need to go through MTSS, and that would be for a specific learning disability, so reading, as well as a social emotional disability. The other 11 disabilities, they don't need to necessarily go through an MTSS process. Many of our people have kind of an MTSS process for that, but legally we have to for those 2 specific areas of impact, specific learning disability and SED. And the Colorado Department of Education has really clear guidelines surrounding how kids qualify for those pieces. And then if you look here, these are kind of the key pieces from when a student is qualifying. In this case, if they're qualifying for a specific learning disability, we look at the child as not making sufficient progress to meet age or state approved grade level standards in the areas identified when using a process based on the child's response to scientific research-based interventions. So once the team has implemented those interventions, utilize progress monitoring tools that are both evidence-based and norm reference, then they can make sure they have enough data. And we like to have at least 8 data points to make a determination if a student qualifies. And in the area of specific learning disability, these are the 8 areas where a student can qualify. So that's a key piece for if a student qualifies for a specific learning disability. And for the emotional disability, these 2 pieces that are highlighted are a variety of instructional or behavioral interventions were implemented within the general ed setting, and the child remains unable to receive reasonable educational benefit from gen ed. And really this other piece is indicators that a social emotional area of need or dysfunction has existed over a period of time. Once again, that period of time at a minimum would be 8 weeks. Typically, we would look really at a minimum of 16 weeks for a social emotional disability, but really looking at this requirement too, ensuring the teams are implementing a variety of interventions, as well as having data that demonstrates that area of dysfunction for a long period of time. And just going back, really the experts in our district around both intervention as well as progress monitoring tools are these people on the page: school psychologists, behavior analysts, behavior and SEL specialists, academic interventionists, or special service providers, And lastly, administrators and student support services and curriculum instruction and assessment. And God, sorry, I talked through it. I hope that wasn't too much information all at once. Do you guys have questions about that or anything else related to this?
Is there a clear, I'm not sure if this is really covered in this meeting, but is there a clear guideline on, progress reports within an IEP, like how often
Yeah.
parents
Mhm.
should be getting those, and
Yeah.
then should those be covering every goal?
Yes.
Okay.
But to answer, they should be covering every goal. Per IDEA, the requirement is whenever a grade report, an official grade report comes out, we're required to provide a progress report, a IEP progress report. What we do at the elementary level, because students show more, they're younger and they can show more progress or regression at an earlier age, we have them do progress reports quarterly.
Okay.
At the secondary level, for more resource kids, we have them do them semesterly. And then I want to say, for our more significant needs kids, I think we're doing them trimesterly. I have to look again, but that's the expectation. It's an area we need to improve upon. Case managers feel like it's a heavy lift to do those, but it's extremely important. Yeah. Do you have feedback on that? No, okay.
Oh, but it's always been kind of gray, actually, because I think it is an area to improve on, because
Mhm.
best case scenario, when your student gets a report card,
Mhm.
it should also be included
Yes,
an IEP progress report.
correct.
Okay.
And yeah, and there's a couple ways, and so that's what, when I was a case manager, whenever the grade reports would come out, I would have our administrative assistant send the progress report home as well. And yeah, that's a key component. And if you look in IDA, that's what it takes. That's the law to, so, some people it's great if we could do progress reports more frequently. And we have a lot of that data. Like, for example, if a parent says, hey, can you tell me how he's doing on this particular goal? There's a good chance that the IEP team or the case manager might have 16 data points, but those data points won't show up per se on the progress report that the parent receives, because therefore they have to go into enrich, bring the student up. You want to see the process? Yeah.
I guess it as in everything,
Mhm.
the ARC is getting, gets more calls now.
Right.
And so if someone's asking, if there's problems
Mhm.
or grades are bad,
Yeah.
you're like, well, what does the progress report say on the goals?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then,
They're
so
like-
is that a valid question to ask the parents? Like,
Yes.
did you get a progress report?
Yes.
How are they doing
Yeah.
on their goals, to just start gathering more information as we gather more information on the
Yeah.
case.
And just so you're aware too, you can request a progress report at any time.
At any time. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's I was running into, like, with all the mayhem at.
Yeah.
Know what's going on, I'm getting frustrated, and
Yeah.
I just said, I know what he's working on, like,
Yep.
I would like just to know what he's doing in class, like.
Yeah.
Send me some, and they sent like this amazing, the first week, it was like, we decided to do it weekly, and they sent me this is the recent testing they did with him. I mean, we're doing all this stuff, but I have no idea.
Right.
So it was nice to be able to look at that.
Yeah,
And it wasn't like a formal progress report, but
right.
even that stuff is helpful.
Yeah. That's good information, because then I can go back to my team. And in my opinion, I guess it's on the record because I'm on, being recorded right now, but that's an area that we could improve upon, is ensuring that we're completing progress reports. And because I mean, it is time consuming for the special education teachers. However, with that being said, we're mandated to complete those progress reports. And, I mean, that's just what we need to do.
And then you
And-
know if a goal is reachable,
Absolutely.
you know, it's like, well,
And-
I don't even know how to, you know, someone's like, I don't even know how to measure this. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, then it's not
Yeah, it's
a
not
great
appropriate.
goal.
Yeah.
Some-
And, you know, I think that's one of the things too, Stevie, is our teams have all this information, but they're not necessarily sharing it as they should be with the parents in many instances.
I think the ball gets dropped a little bit there sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. See, that's good information. Yeah. So, and what I'll do, because I send out a weekly newsletter to the whole special education team throughout the district, and I'll talk about that piece.
Oh, can I
That
learn
it does. Yeah, I can share it with you. Yeah. I don't know if it pertained, but yeah, I can.
I would love to know what,
yeah,
you know, sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, I'll send you, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of information in there. I can share, yeah, I'll do that right now.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Is this on, just here, like the slides and the.
No, I'm happy to, you want me to share it with you? Yeah, yeah.
It was nice to meet you all. I've got a 17-year-old with a new broken finger.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
No, I have to get like, I don't even know what to do, but her ski season is over. abruptly.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm gonna, yeah. I'm gonna sign off here.
Thanks, Stephen.
Nice to meet you all. Oh, and I was gonna look at the